Welcome back to the Morning Momentum. If you are just joining us, you are rolling with the host with the most. My name is Alfonsoh. Let's take a look at the Daily Nation. Now, the top story on the Daily Nation this morning: Gulf oil deal ties Kenyans to expensive fuel. Now, contract that would have lapsed this year has been extended indefinitely. Kenyan consumers face a month-long extension of the government-backed fuel import plan, with Gulf oil measures denying motorists, households and industrial users relief from falling petroleum prices globally in a new agreement that will help the country to evade paying hefty penalties. That story is beefed up for you on page 4. On page 6 and 7 of the Daily Nation this morning: new political parties in Gachagua-Kalonzo coalition. Now, the nation has learned of a series of private meetings involving Mr. Gachagua, Mr. Musyoka, and DAPK leader Eugene Wamalwa as they begin plans to run against President William Ruto in the 2027 State House contest. That story is beefed up for you on page 6 and page 7 of the Daily Nation this morning. On page 8, 2013 polls: Chief Isaac Hassan lands Plum State job. Election losers also among beneficiaries of top positions. That story is beefed up for you on page 8. On page 3, widow of former marathon champion among 3 charged with his murder. We'll take a look at that. And on the cover page of the Daily Nation this morning: lecturer strike still on as pay talks flop again. Now, students in public universities will go longer without being taught after a meeting convened by the Committee on Education on the National Assembly to resolve the lecturer strike ended in disarray for the second time after the Interpublic Universities Council's consultative forum failed to table evidence that the government has allocated money to pay the lecturers. The employer had been asked to provide proof that the government had 4.3 billion shillings to pay the lecturers when it appeared before the MPs last week. That story is beefed up for you on the cover page. Let's get up close and candid now with the Nation. On page 2, we will not be derailed, Peace Mission Chief tells Haiti gangs. Now, Alex Didier feels Aime wants sworn in as interim prime minister to replace Cornille in strife-torn nation. Now, former Commander Otunge says they remain on course despite ouster of the interim prime minister and gun attacks on 2 U.S. airline planes. That story is beefed up for you on page 2. On page 3 this morning: retired long-distance runner's widow charged with murder. Now, matter to be mentioned on December 2nd when the court will rule on bond application. Rotich: 2 other suspects deny killing former Vienna marathon champion Kandi on October 3rd in Eldoret town. That story is beefed up for you on page 3 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at page 4. Gulf oil deal ties Kenyans to costly fuel. Now, the contract will elapse after country imports a set volume of fuel whose prices are fixed. Contracts changes to deny consumers relief from failing petroleum prices globally. You want to catch up with more of those insights on page 4. The figures say consumers are overpaying for fuel. So 2 shillings and 70 cents. The 2 consulting firms hired to review the government-backed deal in August concluded that consumers were overpaying by 2 shillings and 70 cents per litre of petrol compared to what they would have paid under the open tender system, OTS. You want to catch up with that on page 4. On page 5 now, petitioners now want Gachagua dropped from Ruto ouster case. Now, they have questioned capacity of the government during crisis, and activists say the move is necessary following Rigath's removal as deputy president. That story is beefed up for you on page 5 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's move on and take a look at page 6. New parties link Gachagua-Kalonzo coalition strategy. Now, on the cards is a plan to abandon Azimio or rebrand it to accommodate new interests. Former DP is currently partyless after being replaced by Deputy President Kithure Kindiki in the United Democratic Alliance. That story is beefed up for you on page 7. Now, in the 2027 face-off, no permanent enemies or friends, only permanent interests. That is what the paper says this morning. The Office of the Registrar of Political Parties issued provisional registration to at least 7 new political parties. The latest being include Kenya Ahadi Party KAP, registered on October 16, 2024, Imarisha Uchumi Party IUP, registered on June 24th. Also, there is People's Forum for Rebuilding Democracy, registered on June 13th this year. Other outfits with provisional registration are the National Economic Development Party, the We Alliance Party, Kenya Liberals Alliance, and Chama Changamko Kenya CCK. So those are the political parties that have been issued with a registration certificate ready for the 2027 face-off. Now let's move on and take a look at page 8. Ex-IEBC boss Paul loses land plum jobs. Now Chepkwony named to chair Salaries and Remuneration Commission, and Arita the CBK deputy governor's position. President Ruto nominates Hassan to head IPOA board. Former MPs Jaguar and Jaldesa also picked for key posts. Now that story is beefed up for you on page 8. At a glance, Isaac chosen as the IPOA chairperson. Now let's move on and take a look at page 10. Why members of Raila's AUC team are unhappy. Now, former Prime Minister is expected to begin door-to-door campaigns. Factions within Secretariat are vying for influence and control of resources. That story is beefed up for you on page 10 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at page 11. Quote and quote, save me from the hangman's nose, end of quote. Now, this is the cry of 150 million shilling isn't raised on time, Stephen Bertrand Munyaho faces execution in Saudi Arabia. Family of veteran journalist is appealing for help to save their son from execution. That story is beefed up for you on page 11 of the Daily Nation this morning. Now, the expert opinion, Africa's health prospects in second Trump presidency. This is a chance for Africa to build on PEPA's success by creating locally driven solutions that meet Africa's needs. That story is beefed up for you on page 12. On page 13, protect investors in Bamburi sale. Now, 2 companies are engaged in a do-or-die battle for ownership of the most profitable cement manufacturer in East Africa. That story is beefed up for you on page 13. Now let's move on swiftly and take a look at other stories that lands us on county news on the Daily Nation this morning. Timami on the spot over 421 million shillings stalled projects. Report shows that 1.29 billion shillings allocated for projects, but only 796.3 million shillings was used. Lamu governor at pains to explain why 75 projects that had been budgeted for had not taken off. You want to catch up with that story on page 17. Now, in Embu County, how man was felled by police bullet in bar. Now, the events of November 9th, 2024 will be etched in the minds of Ogweri shopping center residents in Runyenje's constituency for a long time. It was a Saturday night and revelers were in jovial mood as they timbled their favorite drinks while chatting the night away at a popular bar in Embu. For a Fantas Nyaga Murithi, who is 43 years, the evening was about to come to an end and the casual laborer would go back to his family of 3 children, but it was not to be. As fate would have it, Murithi ended up a dead man instead, with his head blown off by a rogue police officer's bullet. That story is beefed up for you on page 17. In the international scene this morning, UN Security Council mouths action on Sudan conflict. Draft calls for border crossing with Chad to remain open for aid deliveries. The council is discussing a British drafted resolution that demands Sudan's warring parties cease hostilities. That story is beefed up for you on page 19. Let's stay there a little bit. Israeli airstrikes hit Beirut suburbs. Now, the Israeli military carried out at least 5 airstrikes on the Hezbollah-controlled southern suburbs of Beirut on Tuesday after Israel's defense minister ruled out any ceasefire in Lebanon until Israel's goals had been met. That story is beefed up for you on page 19. Now, let's move on and take a look at business news. State agencies' imports hit a record 89 billion shillings, but Kenya Build Kenya initiative has failed to hit targeted levels. Central Bank of Kenya data shows the growth is the highest since June 2017. That story is beefed up for you on page 20. Briefly, in the banking sector, EcoBank in deal for cross-border Africa payments. Now, EcoBank Transformation Incorporated has partnered with Neum, a Singaporean firm, to enable seamless cross-border payments in its 35 African markets. Now, also on the economy, State House seeks more advisors in fresh jobs advert. President William Ruto is seeking to expand his team of economic advisors amid lingering questions on the impact of the current unit in helping his administration turn around the economy. That story is beefed up for you on page 20. Let's shift gears and take a look at sports news on the Daily Nation this morning. Now, Kenya Sevens skippers dropped from World Series over contracts. Vincent Onyala, Tony Omondi failed to sign new 2-year deals offered by KRU. The squad had boycotted training ahead of their return to the World Series, which starts with Dubai Sevens on November 30th. Now, let's move on and take a look at page 30. Firat rallies stars for final dash to qualifiers finish line. Kenyans endure 320 kilometers road trip to match venue in South Africa. Kenya coach calls for united effort in must-win matches against Zimbabwe and Namibia. This is all about the 2025 AFCON qualifiers. Now, on page 30 still, Giants Ghana on the brink of missing out on African finals. 4-time African Cup of Nations winners Ghana could see their streak of 10 successive appearances at the tournament come to an end this week, as victories in their remaining 2 qualifiers may not be through to seal a place at the finals in Morocco. That story is beefed up for you on page 30. On page 31, gifted player who quit studying medicine eyes sporting fame. Also talented in football and volleyball, she studied clinical medicine for 4 months before KDF came calling. KDF's Mukasia, a beach handball international, fights for place in main Kenya team. You want to catch up with that story on page 31. And lastly, on the cover page of the Daily Nation this morning, lecturers strike still on as salary talks collapse again. MPs to meet Treasury and Education Ministry chiefs tomorrow. State fails to table proof that it has budgeted and allocated money demanded by the tutors. That story is beefed up for you on the cover page. Now, with that story of the lecturers' strike, we come to today's end of the Morning Momentum. Thank you so much for joining us on the Morning Momentum. I have been your host, Alfonsoh. See you tomorrow, same time, same place. Until then, do have a beautiful Wednesday rather.